That reminds me, I've got to get a shave. Anyway, it's October, and you know what that means. It's time for me to watch all the movies that I already watch every other time of the year, but now there are actually some normal people who want to talk about them. This year, I've decided to throw together some videos ranking movies across several of the more prominent subgenres in horror, and I can't think of a better start than werewolves. This may actually be my favorite subgenre in horror, even though it definitely is not the strongest in terms of quality or popularity, really. Of course, one thing that you should all know about me, and probably already do know by now, is that I'm not a stickler when it comes to quality. So just keep in mind, this is not ranking these movies from worst to best. These are simply my favorites in the order that I enjoy them. We start off with the 2000 period piece Ginger Snaps, starring Katharine Isabelle and Emily Perkins as two teenage sisters who share a morbid fascination with death and dying, and whose super close bond is put to the test when the older sister, Ginger, is bitten by a werewolf and soon begins a metamorphosis that is just a little more extreme than those faced by your everyday teen. Of course, the common changes that everyone goes through when they're coming into adulthood is a great euphemism for the werewolf transformation process, and it works super well here. A lot of people will say that this actually should be much higher on my list, and it would have been just a few years ago. However, I rewatched it very recently, and while I still really like the movie, it just isn't as enjoyable to me as it used to be. Now, why isn't it as enjoyable to me as it used to be? Well, that would be because I'm old now, and I just don't relate that well with teens, especially mopey, dark, depressed ones. You're not edgy, you're annoying. Also, are we just going to ignore that period joke that I made at the top of this one? I think we probably should. Up next at 14, we have Wes Craven's Cursed, starring Christina Ricci with a great supporting cast that includes Jesse Eisenberg, Portia de Rossi, Judy Greer, Maya, Shannon Elizabeth, and Pacey from Dawson's Creek. His life appears to have taken a bit of a dark turn, and I can't help but feel that it's all Joey's fault. Fucking Joey. Solid cast or not, I wouldn't say that this is a great movie by any stretch, and honestly, this may not even be a good movie in the eyes of most, but it's a fun movie in my opinion. I mean, not many movies can say that they have a werewolf who gives someone the finger for insinuating that they're fat, so that's a win in my book. Listening to interviews from cast members or from Wes Craven, it sounds like a lot of the issues here with the movie ended up being the studio's meddling and some very odd editing decisions, with many actors and characters just being cut out of the film entirely, including Mandy Moore, Corey Feldman, Heather Langenkamp, Robert Forster, Omar Epps, and James Brolin. But hey, it's my list, so this movie is here whether you like it or not. And at lucky number 13, we have Howl, which is a 2015 British film that takes place almost entirely on a train, which is a total layup because we all know trains and werewolves go together like peanut butter and ladies. That's a Step Brothers reference, so don't make it creepy. This is one that I really don't think people hear enough about, probably because it's a werewolf movie. But it is a solid movie. The only thing that really hurts it for me is some of the werewolf effects. When it's using the practical effects and the lighting is low, they look great. But when the CGI comes in, it just comes off looking off to me, as does almost every single werewolf movie that employs a certain level of CGI. So, I mean, it's not to say that CGI is even bad, it's just CGI. And I think that with just a little bit of tweaks to the werewolf here, to the design of the werewolf, this would be much higher on my list. Still, this movie needs to be talked about more, and it probably would have been if they hadn't missed a golden opportunity here. They could have cast Samuel L. Jackson in a cameo where his only line in the entire movie was, "I've had it with these motherfucking werewolves on this motherfucking train." Gold. And don't blame me for the cussing, blame Samuel L. Jackson. Up next at 12 is the 2010 film Where, The Legend Reborn. It's another one that you hear very little about, and I heard about it several years ago, but it took me a long time to actually find it on a streaming service. Obviously, I'm too cheap to buy Blu-rays, and do you even stream, bro? Where is a unique werewolf film in that while yes, it is very much a werewolf movie, it also is a criminal procedural. movie, as it follows criminal defense attorney Kate Moore as she tries to uncover what exactly happened after a family is murdered. She meets resistance from the police chief, who seems bullish on pinning these murders on a strange, abnormally large, and intimidating suspect named Talon. And, by the way, why would you not accuse someone named Talon of being a werewolf? But Talon suffers from a rare genetic disorder that would make it near impossible for him to actually commit this crime. So, is Talon a werewolf? Or is he simply a murderer? Or is he an innocent man wrongly accused? Well, it made it onto a werewolf movie list, so that may be a bit of a spoiler, but hey, that doesn't mean that he is the one that is a werewolf, so watch it. And we move on from the whodunit elements of Were to Werewolves Within, which was released just last year, and is another fun which one of us is a werewolf romp. Werewolves Within has no criminal procedural element, and it's much less grounded. And honestly, it has much more of a comedic tone than a scary tone, in my opinion. Now, it's kind of hard to rank newer movies for me, because these things usually just need time to gestate for a bit to know where they really rank among the movies that I already know and love. Plus, I've only watched this movie once, and the picture quality wasn't ideal. But, at the moment, I feel like this is the proper spot for it. Did I just say splot? The comedy here is mostly well done and very tongue-in-cheek, and there's plenty of meta references, and they have fun with the character trope upon character trope mixed in on the action, and the suspense works too, but for some reason, I'll be honest, I never really cared about who the werewolf was, and that's probably because the tone is so wacky. The cast does a fine job, but the two big standouts here are Sam Richardson as new Ranger Finn Wheeler, and Milana Vaintrub? I'm not sure, but she's phenomenal as the quirky and frankly adorable mailman or woman person. You should definitely check this one out. Okay, it's top 10 time, and we start off with another one that isn't actually really a werewolf movie. It's the 1987 cult classic The Monster Squad, which bombed at the box office and seemed destined to be a totally forgotten movie, but gained a life of its own on VHS and cable, where it gained a devoted following among fans, some of whom really cut their horror teeth, so to speak, on this movie. And this movie probably isn't quite as family-friendly as it appears at a glance, which probably helped it grow because parents didn't think that their children were watching something that they probably shouldn't. I definitely remember the F-bomb being dropped in this movie, and I'm talking about the ugly 7-letter one, not the really fun and harmless 4-letter one. I always describe this movie as Goonies, but with the Universal monsters, and you can call it a ripoff of that if you want, but I think it's better than Goonies. Because, Universal monsters. And again, while the werewolf isn't exactly the main focus here, it looks great and was a solid reimagining of the Wolfman. And his character produces the movie's most famous line by far, which is "Wolfman's got nards," which is also the title of the documentary about the making of this movie that was released in 2018. Again, that title is "Wolfman's Got Nards." Up next is the 2007 movie Trick or Treat. Now, if you've seen this movie, you could be a total dick and say that it really isn't a werewolf movie either. And you're probably right. The werewolf angle is just one of several different stories going on throughout the movie, and you could even make the argument that it's not the most important side story, or that, whoa, hey, look, those werewolves are hot. Sorry, I don't remember where I was going with that. Look, it's a great movie with lots of nods to the genre, and one that I have to watch at least once when my beloved month of October rolls around. It's a true Halloween classic in my opinion. Also, the cute little guy Sam, short for a widely known Gaelic festival celebration known as Samhain, has a seriously iconic look and persona that is just simply perfect for Halloween. 1981 was a really good year for horror, and at number 8 is the 1981 classic The Howling, starring Dee Wallace as news reporter Karen White, who goes undercover to attempt to help police snatch a serial killer known as Eddie, who turns out to be not entirely human. And unfortunately for Karen, Eddie is not alone, and she soon finds herself and her husband stranded within a reclusive werewolf colony with plenty of secrets. Special effects really stand out here, and the movie features perhaps the only transformation scene that can truly give the one in An American Werewolf in London, more on that one later, a legit run for its money. I'm also 90% sure that this was the first werewolf movie that I ever saw, and I loved it enough that I even watched most of the sequels, no matter how terrible they were. You remember how I said that I watched most of the terrible Howling sequels? Well, I said it like 4 seconds ago, so pay better attention. At number 6, we have The Howling 5, The Rebirth. That's right, I actually ranked this one above the original, even though the original is obviously the better movie. There's just something about this one that I love, despite all of its flaws, which are mostly related to spotty to bad acting. I even loved this one as a kid, which is especially weird because this movie is slow, and the werewolf is barely, and I mean barely, even shown. As a kid, I needed a lot of action and a lot of werewolf, or I would be bored, so I don't know why I love this one. I guess maybe just because I've always adored the old remote castle in the middle of a snowstorm setting. And as for the plot, this is yet another which one of us snobby, stupid, charming mofos is a werewolf. I guess whodunits are just natural for the werewolf story, and again, I can't really explain why I love this movie, so if you check it out and hate it, then hey, I never told you it was any good. Ranking at number 6, and it actually pains me to not put this one in the top 5, is 2002 sleeper hit Dog Soldiers, which one can argue is every bit as much of an action movie as it is a horror movie. The film follows a British Special Operations unit whose simple training operation turns into a brutal fight for survival when they encounter unexpected adversaries, and a zoologist named Megan in an area where campfire stories have persisted for years. The werewolves themselves are unique looking, and they almost look to me like they just walked out of a storybook. I'm pretty sure I had a storybook that had werewolves that looked just like this, and I wonder if they had that book too. In fact, if I were ranking just the werewolves in these movies, the ones in Dog Soldiers would probably rank number 2. And the top 5 begins with a low-budget, little-known movie from 1995 called Project Metal Beast. Which sounds, just from the title, like a total Oscar winner or candidate. But, sometimes you just can't judge a movie by its title or its really cool, shiny-looking VHS case. I can't write a thesis on why bad movies make it so high on my list as they do. Well, I guess I could, but no one is going to want to listen to that on YouTube. But it's here, and you're just going to have to come to terms with it. The plot here is that a shady secret operative type encounters a werewolf on a mission and becomes one, and is then terminated. Not as in fired, actually, killed, silver bullet, all that good stuff. But because another shady top secret guy holds onto the cryogenically frozen body and inexplicably wants a team of scientists to experiment on that body, and for these scientists to unwittingly give the body metal skin, everything goes a bit crazy, and we end up with Kane Hodder, notorious for playing Jason Voorhees and making that his role, chasing down Kim Delaney down many different corridors in a hospital while wearing a werewolf suit with really tall heels. I don't know what I'm doing with my life, really. Like I said, 1981 was a good year for horror, and I was born in 1981, so that may not be a coincidence. But coming in at number 4 is 1981's An American Werewolf in London. Now 4 is high, but for most people, An American Werewolf in London will be ranked much higher on their favorite werewolf movies list. In fact, I'd say from what I've been able to tell, the general consensus is that this movie is the best werewolf movie ever made, including even the original Wolfman. The special effects in the film are outstanding, particularly the extended transformation scene that had to be just as mind-bending for audiences at the time in 1981 as the Lon Chaney transformation was for audiences in the 40s. That seems so tame now, but just had to be mind-blowing then. David Naughton and Griffin Dunne are terrific as the two American students who picked the wrong place and the wrong time to leave the main road and end up alone and exposed on the moors of London. If you haven't seen this one, definitely check it out. It's one of the few on here that you should like, even if you're not that big into horror or werewolf movies in general. And coming in third is the 1996 movie Bad Moon, starring Muriel Hemingway, child star Mason Gamble, who played Dennis the Menace in the 1993 screen version, and Michael Pare from Eddie and the Cruisers fame. If you can consider Eddie and the Cruisers fame to be fame, my mom, aunt, and grandma certainly loved both of the Eddie and the Cruisers movies, maybe even more than they loved Dirty Dancing. In reality, though, there are actually only two real stars in this movie, and that is the werewolf, who actually is my favorite werewolf. If I had to pick one that would be the quintessential werewolf, that is the way a werewolf should look, it is the one in this movie. And the other star is a German Shepherd named Primo, who is playing a German Shepherd named Thor in the movie. As Robert Downey Jr.'s character from Tropic Thunder would say, Primo's a dog who's playing a dog that's fighting a dude disguised as another dog. What? You just watched the movie, okay? It's not a big thinker, and it has, like I said, the definitive werewolf in terms of looks and special effects. Even if the transformation scene itself is a little weak, but luckily short. And finally, there's one other fun fact about this movie that makes it interesting, and that is that it's based on a novel named Thor, which is one of, if not the only, novel that is written entirely from the perspective of a dog. Is it a good book? I have no idea. I've never been able to find it other than a few inserts. But I love the movie adaptation, and for years this was actually my absolute favorite werewolf movie. And at 2, we have Stephen King's Silver Bullet, which in only the last few years actually overtook Bad Moon as my favorite werewolf movie, and then it was replaced very recently as well. But it's odd that Silver Bullet replaced Bad Moon, because Silver Bullet was released well before Bad Moon, released in 1985, and I had definitely seen it when I was younger, but I remember that it was just too slow, and I didn't see the werewolf enough, apparently, to really understand it or to like it as much when I was little. Plus, as I watch it now as an adult, the movie just screams nostalgia, but obviously I wouldn't have nostalgia back then, so that didn't work. Also, it wasn't a bad decision to show the werewolf sparingly in this movie, because it really is not all that convincing of a werewolf, in my opinion, and it sort of flirts with looking more like a dog or even a bear from certain angles, but it isn't bad or anything. But as I've gotten older, this movie has gotten much better. Corey Haim is great as Marty, who's confined to a wheelchair. Gary Busey is great as Marty's Uncle Red, who clearly has a drinking problem, but also loves his nephew. And although her role takes a little bit of a backseat, Megan Follows also gives a solid performance as Marty's sister Jane. And it's a brother-sister relationship that is definitely relatable. If I were going to recommend just one of these movies to someone who isn't really into horror movies, this one and American Werewolf in London are probably the two that I would say. And even I'm actually surprised that a movie knocked this one down a peg. And at number 1, we have the movie that did knock Silver Bullet down a peg, and that is The Wolf of Snow Hollow, which was released just last year, and somehow managed to shoot all the way to the top. This is a movie that isn't going to be for everyone, from what I've gathered. I've seen a lot of people who hate it, and have called it garbage for various reasons, mostly because they say that the main character is totally unlikable, and there's really no one to root for here. Or they say it's clearly a vanity project, and they weren't at all surprised when the credits rolled and they saw that the lead actor, Jim Cummings, was also the writer and director of the movie. They call it a vanity look-at-me piece. I, however, love the lead character, and find him to be both interesting and hilarious in a subtle, quirky, and wholly ironic manner. And I'll also say this movie is deeper than it seems on the surface if you want to explore it. There's an interesting conversation to be had here when you look at the movie as a metaphor / commentary on toxic masculinity. It definitely isn't a coincidence that all of the victims targeted by the werewolf are female, and also that the female cop obviously has her shit more together than the young man who is obviously destined to be the sheriff, simply because his aging father is the current sheriff. Some argue that the movie actually promotes toxic masculinity by trying to make you see the lead character in a certain light, or promoting some of the sexism as humor, but I think that it's important to realize that it can be humorous at times, and unfortunately toxic masculinity is not something that will ever go away just by totally demonizing it, and it's not always something that's even black and white, or even conscious at times. With that being said, though, you can also just totally forget all of that and watch this movie and not think it has anything to do at all with any of the stuff that I just said. I personally love this movie, and there's one scene in it in particular that I can watch just over and over. The music is great in it. The lead character's freak out is great, and I'm a big fan of a man slapping another man just out of the blue, and that happens at least twice in this movie, so that's a good deal. And that will do it for my top 15 favorite werewolf movies. Let me know in the comments section if you enjoyed my list. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll be dropping some more videos as we get closer to Halloween, going over some of the other subgenres such as vampires, ghosts, demons, all that good stuff. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you have a happy and safe Halloween.